And now for something completely different.
Hey everyone, today I'm going to be trying something completely different. I'm going to be reading the first chapter from an original short story, or short story, novella. I don't know what it qualifies as. Basically, the first chapter from the first entry in a fantasy series I've been writing. I don't know how this is going to turn out. I might end up doing the whole thing, or this might be the extent of it, but the reason being, the video I had planned for this week is taking longer than expected, so here is something in its place. Hope you enjoy. The Omega Blade. Part 1. The Emberhaven Games. Chapter 1. A 12-year-old boy walked through the woods, his blue eyes wide as he studied his snow-covered surroundings. He could hear a rushing river to his left, but he paid it no mind. In his right hand, he clutched a wooden sword he'd taken from his village's training arena. Strapped to his left forearm was a roughly circular shield made from the remains of a broken door. To his right, he heard something crash through the brush. He glanced in that direction, then kept moving forward, a low-hanging branch lightly brushing against his short black hair. After a couple minutes, he spotted someone hiding behind a tree ahead of him, someone around his size. The boy raised his shield in front of his body and slowly moved closer. He had almost reached the tree when he suddenly heard something behind him. It was faint, but he recognized the sound of careful footsteps in the snow. Turning around, he saw a gray-eyed girl trying to sneak up behind him. Her white skin was a shade lighter than his, and she had strawberry blonde hair that went halfway down her back. In her left hand was a trading sword identical to his, and in her right hand was a wooden club roughly half the length of the sword. Realizing she had lost the element of surprise, the girl charged the boy, who raised his shield defensively. Being left-handed, the girl used the sword as her primary weapon and the club more defensively. She ducked under a slash from the boy, then swung her club low. The boy yelled in pain as she hit his right thigh, but when she swung at his left leg, he blocked the strike with his makeshift shield. He slashed with his sword, which she dodged. There was a brief pause in the action, then the boy suddenly punched with his left arm. He was aiming for her wooden blade, trying to disarm her. He missed, and the edge of his shield caught her left wrist instead, but the pain from the impact caused her to drop her sword. Suddenly getting a mischievous grin on her face, the girl dropped her club and pounced on the boy, tackling him to the ground and disarming him of his own sword. Moving quickly, she turned herself to the side and planted her knees on his shield, pinning it, and by extension, his left arm. "I got you, Val," the girl said excitedly. "Say it." "No," the boy protested. He tried to grab her with his right hand, but she grabbed his wrist with her own hands and pinned it to his chest. She licked his cheek. "Say Kaylee's the best." Val sighed. "Kaylee's the best. Now give me a kiss." "Why?" "Because I said so." Rolling his eyes, he lifted his head and kissed her cheek. "Can I get up now?" Kaylee thought about it. "I suppose." She got off of him, and he watched as she began jogging back towards their village. 17 years later, Valerius Ironshade made his way through a crowd towards a large arena. Standing just under 6 feet tall, he wore a plain brown cloak over a dark green shirt and pants. Preferring to be called Val, he was part of a team of mercenaries called the Shadow Bandits, the rest of whom were following close behind him. Luxia was a female member of the Boreads, a race referred to by many as ice demons due to their extremely low natural body temperatures, affinity for ice-based magic, and crowns of vestigial horns. She was the tallest of the group at 6 feet even. Although human-looking in size and shape, Luxia had dark blue skin, short green hair, and golden eyes. 42 years old and preferring to be called Lux, she was the only member of the group aside from Val who had been a mercenary before they became a team. The shortest of the group at 5'2", Erin Damazath was a member of the amphibious Triton race. She had silvery blue skin, eyes that were a brilliant shade of green, and long, dark blue hair that didn't grow within 2 inches of the base of her pointed ears, giving the appearance that it had been shaved there. At 35 years old, she was a full 2 decades past reaching maturity, yet she wasn't even a quarter of the way through her potential lifetime. Like the rest of her kind, she had webbed hands and feet as well as small fins on her calves. The oldest of the group at 137, Leoric Swiftguard was an elven man who stood just 3 inches taller than Erin. He was the only left-handed member of the group and had copper-colored skin, brown eyes, and short red hair. The last of the 5 was Nefrius, a tiefling man who was just below average height. In addition to the horns and prehensile tail common among tieflings, he had silver eyes, crimson-colored skin, and short purple hair. The The youngest of the group at 27, he was in a romantic relationship with Leoric. As they were walking, Erin heard a man shouting to her left. Then she saw a small figure in the crowd break into a run. The figure had a faded brown cloak with the hood up, and when Erin looked up, she saw 2 human men and 1 woman pushing their way through the crowd. Judging by their attire, it was clear that the woman came from money and the men were her guards. The small person looked back over their shoulder, and a moment later they bumped into Erin. The cloak's hood fell down, revealing the face of a young, red-headed tiefling girl. She was no older than 13, and her horns were just starting to show. The girl had a leather pouch clutched to her chest that jingled when she bumped into Erin, but what caught Erin's eye was that the girl looked like she hadn't eaten in a couple of days. "What's your name, kid?" Erin asked softly, a plan forming in her head. Zayola, the girl replied nervously. "My name is Zayola." Erin placed a hand on the leather pouch. "I'm going to keep this safe until they go away," she said, looking down into Zayola's bright blue eyes. "Okay?" Zayola looked at the humans, then back up at Erin, then she nodded. "Okay." Not missing a beat, Erin tucked the money pouch into her clothes, gently grabbed Zayola's shoulders, and moved her so she was standing next to Nefrius. "Zayola, this is Uncle Nefrius," Erin said quickly, looking at both her and Nefrius to make sure they understood. "He adopted you after your parents passed away." Nefrius and Zayola both nodded, so Erin turned to face front. Half a minute later, the 3 humans pushed their way through the crowd. "There you are!" the woman growled, roughly grabbing Zayola by the shoulder. "Hey!" Nefrius yelled, pulling her hand off the girl. "Watch it!" The woman got a disgusted look on her face as she pulled her hand away. "Don't touch me, hellspawn!" Leoric's nostrils flared, and suddenly he was standing between Nefrius, Zayola, and the 3 humans. "Utter one more derogatory word and I'll decorate the ground with your blood," he said, his voice dangerously calm. The woman opened her mouth to speak, then noticed the elven dagger in Leoric's left hand and closed it. "That girl stole my money," the woman said after thinking for a moment, her anger barely contained. "Impossible," Leoric said. "She hasn't left our sight since we arrived in the city." "Judging by that dress, losing a few copper won't put much of a dent in your fortune," Val remarked. The woman shot Erin a death glare, then turned back to the elf and the tieflings. "I know it was you," she said, looking down at Zayola. "Give me the bag and I won't tell the authorities." Nefrius reached down and removed Zayola's cloak, revealing tattered green clothes. Then he turned her in a circle. "Do you see any money?" he asked. "I don't." "Fucking tieflings," the woman snapped. "You think you can just get away with anything just because you're descended from demons?" Leoric was moving as soon as she finished speaking, and his dagger opened cuts on both of the woman's cheeks. She cried out in pain and touched her cheeks, looking more offended than hurt. "Walk away," he snarled. The woman was fuming, but she turned and stormed off rather than escalate things further. Once she was gone, Erin turned back to Zayola. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" Erin asked softly. Zayola nodded. "Good." Erin handed the leather pouch back to the girl. "Get yourself some food. Pick your next target more carefully." "Thank you," Zayola said as she turned and walked away. Half an hour later, the 5 of them found their seats in the middle level of the arena, and soon a human man in his mid-60s walked out to a podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arjun Scobrook shouted into an enchanted pendant necklace that amplified his voice. "Barbarians and paladins, rangers and rogues, soldiers and mercenaries, knights and guards, humans and elves, tieflings and dwarves, half-breeds of every variety. In these arenas of sweat and blood, you are all equally doomed. Welcome to the 42nd Annual Emberhaven Games." The crowd cheered. The city of Emberhaven had held a 5-day fighting tournament every year for over 4 decades. Due to the sheer number of participants, there were 7 arenas used for the tournament fights. As the tournament went on, some fighters were killed, but others were simply eliminated. With fewer arenas needed for the tournament fight each day, the unused arenas were open for eliminated fighters to challenge and fight each other. They had no hope of re-entering the tournament itself, but the unofficial matches gave them an opportunity to at least win some money. There were certain variables of each fight that, if not agreed upon by the fighters, were chosen at random. The variables included how many weapons each fighter could use, what type of weapons could be used, whether or not enchanted items could be used, and the requirements for victory, among other things. If a fighter had no enchanted weapons, they would be offered a selection of temporary enchantments. Armor, while encouraged, was optional. Enchanted armor and shields could be used, but were counted under the limited number of enchanted items a fighter could use. "You all know the rules, otherwise they never would have let you in," Arjun continued once the cheering had stopped. "Now, allow me to introduce our first fighters." A gate at the east end of the arena opened and a Boread woman walked out. Just over 5.5 feet tall, she appeared human at a distance, but she had red eyes, pale blue skin, and long purple hair that was tied up and out of the way. "Coming from the north, I give you Kion!" Arjun shouted. "Princess of Cantarath and heir to the frozen throne!" More than half of the crowd clapped. Lux was one of the few who cheered. "Her challenger comes to you from this very city!" Arjun shouted as the gate at the west end of the arena opened. "I give you Rena Vina Ironhoof, survivor of the Andolan massacre and captain of the city guard." A Minotaur woman walked out to thunderous applause. Nearly a foot taller than the princess, she had green eyes and dark brown fur. "Wait, I thought Minotaurs were half bull," Nephrius said. "They are," Leoric confirmed. "Sort of. Bulls are male cows. Why does a female Minotaur have bull horns?" Leoric shrugged. "I don't think Minotaurs work the same way as actual cows and bulls." "Our fighters have agreed to the use of 2 weapons of any kind," Arjun was explaining. "One weapon may be enchanted, but not both. The requirements for victory will be death or forfeit. Failure to follow the rules will be considered forfeiture. Do you both understand?" Both women gave him a thumbs up. "Wonderful! Princess, Captain, please select your weapons and armor." On each side of the arena, 5 crates opened on their own, and Kion and Rena Vina turned away from each other and walked over to them. Kion selected leather armor that, while only a couple layers thick, offered maximum coverage without restricting her movement. Moving to another crate, she pulled out a pair of sheathed daggers. The crate, along with one of the others, closed on its own. Moving to a third crate, she retrieved a bow, a quiver, and a dozen arrows with different colored feathers. 2 green, 2 red, 2 purple, and 6 white. She put the arrows in the quiver, strapped it and the daggers to her body, and picked up the bow. 5 silver says the arrows draw first blood, Lux said, to no one in particular. Aaron glanced at her. "You're on." In the arena, Rena Vina also put on leather armor, choosing a chest piece that was more than twice as thick as Kion's armor, but foregoing leg protection, presumably in favor of mobility. Looking through a second crate, Rena Vina pulled out a spear that was nearly as long as she was tall and had an asymmetrically wavy spearhead. 2 of her 5 crates closed as soon as she did. Moving to a third crate, she selected a pair of one-handed axes and put them on her belt. "Excellent!" Arjun shouted. "Without further ado, let the match begin!" They started roughly 50 yards apart, and Rena Vina began moving towards Kion. Once she had closed to around 35 yards, Kion fired an arrow with white feathers and missed. Her second arrow flew in a perfect arc to hit Rena Vina in the face, only for the Minotaur to slash it out of the air with her spear, in an impressive feat of timing and reflexes that drew a couple dozen scattered gasps from the crowd, including Lux. Closing to 20 yards, Rena Vina threw her spear, which flew harmlessly over Kion's right shoulder. The princess knocked a third white-feathered arrow, only for her eyes to widen as the spear reappeared in the Minotaur's hand. Kion fired, but the arrow was intercepted like the second. Knocking a purple-feathered arrow, she waited until Rena Vina threw her spear before firing. Doing so prevented her from dodging in time, and the spear grazed her left cheek, drawing purple blood. However, it also meant that Rena Vina had no weapon in hand to deflect the arrow, which hit her right upper arm just above the elbow, too low for her armor to cover. Grunting in pain, Rena Vina broke the arrow's shaft, then her spear appeared in her left hand. Kion knocked another purple-feathered arrow, firing half a second before Rena Vina threw her spear at a perfect arc to hit Kion in the face. The princess twisted her body, saving herself at the cost of her remaining arrows, which the spear broke as it passed over her quiver and sliced off a few strands of her hair. Her arrow hit the Minotaur's armor but couldn't penetrate it, and Rena Vina promptly broke that arrow as well. Dropping her bow, Kion drew her daggers and began sprinting towards her opponent. Rena Vina's spear returned to her, but instead of throwing it, she held it in both hands and stood her ground. When Kion got close enough, Rena Vina jabbed, forcing the princess to dodge to the right. Instead of pulling her spear back, Rena Vina swung left. Kion ducked under the strike, only to take a hoof to the gut when Rena Vina kicked her. The Boread princess landed on her back, and 7 broken arrows fell out of her quiver. Rena Vina stabbed downward, and Kion rolled to her right, then turned and kicked the spear while it was still on the ground. She rolled again to dodge another stab, then kicked the spear again, breaking it just above the spearhead. Growling, Rena Vina dropped the broken shaft and removed the axes from her belt. Scrambling to her feet, Kion held her left dagger in a reverse grip and her right dagger normally. She dodged a pair of axe swings, then struck back, slashing Rena Vina's left thigh. Ice formed around the wound, but before Kion could follow up, Rena Vina slammed the handle of her left axe into the princess's face, narrowly missing her nose. Rena Vina raised her right axe to strike, only for a tremor to suddenly shake her arm. Confused, she looked down at her hand, and a moment later her fingers unclenched, causing her to drop the axe. "What is this?" Reenavina asked, seeing that the broken arrows in her arm and armor had fallen out. "Another enchantment? The princess needs to cheat to win?" Kion laughed as she wiped blood from a cut on her upper lip. "No magic," she replied, grinning. "Just poison." Reenavina tried to make a fist with her right hand, only to find that she couldn't. Growling, she slashed with her remaining axe, but Kion dodged her attacks with ease and countered with half a dozen slashes to her arms and torso, with ice forming on the fur and armor around each one. She then used her left dagger to hook Reenavina's axe and disarm her of it. "Yield," Kion said, sheathing her daggers. "The poison should wear off in a few hours." Roaring, Reenavina lowered her head and charged. Staying light on her feet, Kion dodged her opponent's horns and leaped up onto her back. Grabbing the Minotaur's left horn for support, she drew a dagger in her right hand and used it to cut Reenavina's throat. There was a moment of silence as Kion climbed off her fallen foe. Lux leaped to her feet and cheered, and most of the crowd followed suit. "The princess is our first winner!" Arjun exclaimed. "Fighters, I advise you to keep track of the time so that you're not late for your matches. For those of you just here to watch, welcome to the Emberhaven Games!" That is the end of Chapter 1. Might do more in the future, haven't decided yet. This is both an experiment and also a last-minute thing, so we'll see. That's all for now. Stay safe in these crazy times.